Welcome to Module 3 of Education 207, Designing Effective Lessons for All Learners. This module focuses on lesson alignment. In this session, we will explore what it means to align your lesson elements to ensure strong instruction. You'll learn how state standards, learning objectives, and assessments must connect clearly, and how backward design can help you plan with that alignment in mind. So let's jump in. Our objectives for this module are to explain the importance of aligning standards, objectives, and assessment, to apply principles of backward design to lesson planning, and to evaluate sample lessons for alignment and coherence. The focus on how alignment strengthens instruction and ensures that we teach matches what we expect students to learn and show through assessment is critical to ensure that we have strong student outcomes and overall lesson coherence, meaning that everything is purposely and intentionally connected. So one of the questions that we often get is, what are these elements? So let's go ahead and jump in so that we can talk about the main elements that we're talking about with lesson alignment. Lesson alignment means that your teaching isn't random, it's not disconnected, it's not what I kind of like to call like the flavor of the week topic. It's not like a teacher is just going through saying, oh, I liked this poem, or oh, I remember doing this fun math project, or no, that's not the way that we structure our lessons to support student learning. So each part of a teacher's lesson should tie back to the standards and the learning goals. In future courses, you are going to learn about standards. And in fact, maybe in some of your content classes, you're already jumping in and talking about standards. Standards are something that states determine standards. Sometimes we're aligned to national standards, depending on what your content area is. But these are agreed upon by educators and experts in the field, and they ensure that learning is not redundant, meaning we're not teaching the same thing to students every grade, that they're actually progressing through their educational journey. And so these standards are what guide our learning. Here at McNeese State University, we tie our learning to Louisiana state standards. So this ensures, alignment ensures consistency among standards. So these big picture expectations that students are striving towards, objectives. And so these are tied to every lesson. What are students expected to do in that lesson? And how is that linked to the standards? Then the instruction, that means the actual activities that we use and the lessons that we use to teach the students. And then assessment, how the students are going to be evaluated to determine if they have met the standards. So this alignment promotes intentional planning and clear learning pathways. It also enhances instructional coherence and student achievement. This helps students know what they're expected to learn and how they'll demonstrate success. So let's take just a moment and examine the alignment triangle. So think of alignment as a triangle. The standards are your learning goals and your objectives. So in the image at right, it's going to be at the top, that red, the learning goals and objectives. Those objectives and assessments should be directly tied together. So notice how if we look at the blue, that's feedback and assessment. If these are not aligned, then we know that we need to go back into the teaching and learning activities and make adjustments. So that's called responsive instruction. And that's in the green. And so ideally what we would want to be doing is, what are those learning goals and objectives? what are our assessments, and how do we plan teaching and learning activities to ensure, and notice how it wraps right back around, it meets the learning goals and objectives. So all three of these elements are tightly tied together. So remember that standards define what students must know and do. Objectives translate standards into specific learning goals. And objectives get down all the way to the lesson. So like a one-day lesson can have a very specific objective that's tied to that big picture standard. And then, of course, assessments measure mastery of those objectives. So let's take a moment and talk about backward design. Backward design flips the traditional planning model. Instead of starting with what you want to teach, you begin with the end in mind, what you want students to learn and how they'll demonstrate it. Then you build lessons to get them there. So stage one is identifying the desired results. What are those standards and objectives? Stage two is determining an acceptable evidence collection. So that would be the assessment. How are they going to be tested on this? What does the test look like? What do the items look like? What do they have to do in their evaluation to demonstrate that they've achieved the learning standards and objectives? And then stage three is planning learning experiences, the actual instruction piece of it. And if you look at right, there are some question prompts that kind of guide through that thinking process. What do I want my learners to learn? And then how will I determine what they've learned? And ultimately, what content activities will support the learning goals and the objectives? So that's kind of a basics of backward lesson design. So let's talk about why alignment matters. Misaligned lessons waste instructional time, and ultimately it confuses learners. It really leads to frustration, and even very young students can tell when the instructional plan is aimless. When lessons are aligned, students are more likely to achieve goals because instruction, tasks, and assessments are all pulling in the same direction. And one of the social and emotional outcomes that we notice is these students are students in classrooms that have really strong alignment are more invested in the learning process. They're more invested in setting their own personal goals. And they are typically more interested in the content, and they're able to make connections between what they're learning and their lived experiences. So essentially, alignment matters because it prevents that instructional drift, that aimlessness. It supports equitable learning outcomes. So this means that all students in the class are going to have access to the learning. It improves assessment validity. So how they're being tested is actually going to be more credible because the alignment supports that assessment. To kind of boil it down, basically what we're teaching them is directly tied to what we're testing them on. And it guides students with clarity and with purpose. Some common alignment issues are actually too frequent, and they can creep into even the very best lesson plans, and the most effective teacher can still encounter alignment issues. There are frequent problems in early lesson planning. Either a novice teacher stepping into the classroom, for those very first years of teaching, but even an experienced teacher who maybe is moved to a new grade level or a new school or even a new state and encounters maybe some slightly different standards and expectations. It takes a little time and some really intentional planning to ensure alignment is in place. Of course, we want our teachers to have fun, and we want them to be creative in their lesson planning. We want them to make sure that they're matching their teaching to the needs of their students, the specific readiness and interest needs. But in order for our learning to be equitable, we can't water down the learning experience. We've got to make sure that we're tying them to standards that are holding them accountable for rigorous learning in the domain so that they are prepared no matter where they go to study or no matter where they go for their careers or even to become citizens in a society. They have been exposed to the same level of rigor that they are going to be performing, practicing, or even just rubbing shoulders with in society. So alignment helps us stay on track to ensure that our objectives are not too vague or that they're unrelated to the standards, that our assessments are not measuring the learning goals, and that our activities, maybe they're engaging and fun, but they're rather irrelevant when it comes to learning in the domain. So we want to make sure that these alignment issues don't creep into our learning experience. And if they do from time to time, we want to go back to that alignment triangle. And that means that we really need to get everything back in check. What are my standards and objectives? What are my tests? And do my instructional activities align with meeting those two elements? When reviewing your own or others' lesson plans, use this alignment checklist. If the answer is no to any of these questions, revise to tighten the connections. Are the objectives clearly derived from standards? Does the assessment measure the stated objective? Do the instructional tasks prepare students for the assessment? So as we move forward in our course, you will have some opportunities to kind of test out some of these checklist questions in some of the future critical components that we're going to study in some of the future modules. But as you begin observing classes later this semester, as you walk into classrooms, what are the standards? What are they trying? What are the learning goals for the lesson? And are the instructional activities aligned? Are they supporting students meeting those learning goals? That's a really quick check that you can kind of check for when you're looking at any lesson. As you move forward in our coursework and you move on to other courses in the Burton College of Education, you will have an opportunity to clearly identify standards in your content area and what we call unpack the standards and really write those objectives to make sure that you're meeting the standards. But right now, we just want to make sure you understand the language and you understand what these things are and begin to look for them in your learning process. So let's look at one example just so that we can kind of play this out. The standard requires analysis. So let's look at the standard. Analyze persuasive techniques in media. But the objective is writing. Students will write an opinion paragraph. And the assessment is about nutrition. Group poster on healthy eating. None of these three elements align. A better version would have students analyzing actual media pieces and explaining persuasive strategies in writing. So this is just a brief example. Notice that it says analyze in the standard persuasive techniques, but the objective, it has the students writing an opinion paragraph, not actually analyzing it. So the alignment is not perfect here. And then when we get to the assessment, as I mentioned before, while we may use some persuasive techniques in this, it's not clearly aligned to the standard, which was analyzing. The students were going to create it themselves. So we've got some misalignment here. So by the end of Module 3, we want to remember that alignment is foundational to effective lesson planning. We want to remember to use backward design to help us start with the end in mind when we're actually designing lessons. And we want to be sure to review the alignment checklist as we plan and complete a quiz to assess our understanding of this module's outcomes. So you will take a quiz, make sure that you are following the directions on your learning module, and you are using your lesson materials to prepare. The materials on Canva may have some additional activities for you to participate in and to practice your learning, whether you are in the online or face-to-face environment. So your instructor will be supporting you in those particular learning activities. Make sure that you're reading carefully and following all directions. Have a wonderful week and reach out to your instructor if you have any questions.